Yo, we step up in the scene, check your engine is clean. DPF guys got your ride smoking green. No block, no drag, just pure machine. Come show us your truck, we'll make it pristine. We just wanna know, can your diesel uphold? Bring something dirty, we'll turn it to gold. It's like this, we clean up your flow. Now your engine is gliding. It's time to hit the road.
All right, we are live, and it is a chilly day here in Atlanta. I just want to check some technology out here. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel. If you're not at YouTube right now, why not? Go to youtube.com/DPF guys, or just search for DPF guys on YouTube, and don't miss any of our content. I've got some really cool stuff coming up. If you're catching this someplace other than YouTube, head over to youtube.com or go to your YouTube app and join the action. So I'm James from DPF Guys, your go-to for diesel after treatment services. And, you know, whether you're an owner-operator with just one truck that you depend on for your livelihood, or you manage a small fleet, a large fleet, a huge fleet, or run a repair shop or truck dealership, you've got the expertise to keep you running clean and compliant. So we handle everything with the diesel engine, from your light and medium duty pickup trucks to passenger vehicles, RVs, and even the off-road stuff, equipment like tractors, cranes, skid steers, and even the stuff that doesn't move, generators, wood chippers, that sort of thing. If it has a DPF, we've got you covered. Call or text us at 404-999-1361 for more info. 404-999-1361. I'm gonna pull this up a few times during this live, so screenshot that number so you don't forget how to get hold of us. Got questions? Drop a comment in the doodly-doo, wherever it might be, above me, below me, beside me, and I'll answer live during this session. Always consult your mechanic for specific issues. Pricing discussed here is for reference only and not an official quote. And I'm not an attorney or a doctor, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn once in my life. So what do we have for question number 1? Let's get ripping through these. All right. Why does my truck keep going into regen, but the soot level never goes down? Good question. We get this a lot. If your truck keeps going into regen, but the soot level never drops, something is preventing the system from burning off soot effectively. The truck is trying to clean itself during the regen, but something upstream is preventing it to be successful or complete or even start. Well, could be a few things. Failed or stuck sensors. And your truck relies on a pressure differential pressure sensor to measure how full the DPF is, how restricted the exhaust flow is through it. If that sensor is faulty, it might be misreading soot levels, keeping the regen cycle running indefinitely. You could have a clogged DOC, or diesel oxidation catalyst. That's the part that produces the heat, which is needed for regen. And if the DOC is face plugged or carbon packed, it won't allow enough heat to reach the DPF, meaning regens won't work, and soot just keeps piling up. A lot of times we want to look for exhaust leaks, because a tiny exhaust leak, even a hairline crack, will allow hot exhaust to escape, and that heat is going someplace where it doesn't belong and not going where it needs to go. So if you have a leaking bellows pipe, loose clamps, cracked exhaust manifold, heat can escape before it even reaches the DPF. Your truck might be trying to regen, but the exhaust isn't getting hot enough to burn off the soot, which means you've got low engine temperatures. If your engine is running too cool, your exhaust temperatures won't be high enough for the regen to work properly, and which means that if you are lucky enough to have a computer or a OTR OTR performance diagnostics, good guys, by the way, you'll see that you might look at this and say, hey, the temperature of the exhaust coming off the engine, which is going to be called a few things. One of them could be called the DOC inlet. And you might be seeing 450, 500 degrees. And while that's a good temperature to bake a pizza, it is not hot enough to actually give you the temperatures you need in the end to burn the soot off the DPF. You want to see temperatures coming off the engine that are all of 700 to 800 degrees. And once it gets to that temperature, that's hot enough where then the DOC can do its work and get you the 980, 1112 degrees or so that you need to actually burn off the soot. So what causes low engine temp? Something as simple as a stuck open thermostat, and the engine never warms up fully. Or fan clutches, your fan should cycle on and off to keep the engine cool, but not too cool. And if the fan clutch gets stuck, it normally gets stuck on. The cooling fan will run constantly, pulling too much heat from the engine, not giving you enough heat there. Bad coolant sensor, the ECM thinks the engine is hotter than it really is. Just the opposite, where it's got, oh, it's too hot. It won't let it get hotter. It runs that cooling fan longer than it should. Severe cold weather operation, not really an issue down here in the South, but if you're up in the great white north of Wisconsin or North Dakota or Alaska or something like that, you're gonna, you might, and you're running light loads, you might never get hot enough to actually do a complete regen. Possibly a stuck EGR valve. If the EGR valve is stuck open, it can route too much exhaust gas back into the intake, reducing the amount of fresh air available for combustion. This leads to cooler combustion temperatures and lower overall exhaust temps, making it harder for the regen cycle to reach the required temperature. Another thing is your engine brake, your Jake brake, works by keeping exhaust valves open, which releases cylinder pressure and slows the truck down. If it gets stuck in the on position, it can reduce engine load and prevent normal exhaust temperatures from building up, leading to regen issues. Another big one is your air filter, your air intake filter, your cold air filter. And if that's dirty, if that thing's plugged up, looks like it's got a mouse nest in it, the restricted airflow limits air into the engine, affecting air to fuel ratio, and this can easily result in poor combustion, lower exhaust temperatures, and also produce excessive soot, making it harder to regen properly, and also creating more soot and plugging things up, so it's kind of a vicious cycle. DEF or EGR issues, increasing soot production, can basically produce so much soot that the regen can't keep up with it. Bad fuel injectors, that is a big one. Listen carefully. If you've got a box truck with a Cummins 6.7 engine, and that's going to be your typical Freightliner M2, International 4300, Ford F750, some of the newer Hinos, they all have 6.7 engines. 6.7, decent engine. The only problem is that the injectors have a tendency to completely poop out on you at about 250,000 miles. Turning down my volume a bit. And what happens then is your injectors start to fail, they begin overfueling, and lo and behold, that will produce too much soot, will plug things up, and will also produce excessive heat and damage your DPF, which is kind of separate from the regen. Or you just might need to be one of our customers at some point here. You need a DPF cleaning. The regen only burns off soot, but over time the ash is left, and that will build up in the filter. Ash doesn't burn off in a regen, just sits there taking up space, right? So if your filter is full of ash, regen cycles won't do anything other than waste your time and waste your fuel, and your truck will try to keep cleaning itself with no results. So really want to look at this, and if your truck is calling for a regen, it's doing it for a reason. And if it calls for a parked regen and you don't remember the last time you got your DPF cleaned, if it's been more than a few months, more than a few years especially, you probably are due for a DPF cleaning. Now, a regen is designed to be a temporary solution, kind of like putting a donut tire on your car when you get a flat, and run a forced regen, get to where you need to go, but then schedule a cleaning with somebody like us. If you do need to reach us, of course, 404-999-1361. It's a good way to get a hold of us. So what should you do? Check for fault codes if you have any, especially related to sensors, DOC efficiency, or EGR issues. Get out and listen and look for exhaust leaks around the turbo bellows pipe, and the DPF clamps. The turbo bellows pipe, not every truck has this. Some of them have it and it's covered by insulation. You can't see it. But that will, because it's got the bellows, the kind of the accordion shape to it, there are inherent weak spots on that, and over time those can develop tiny cracks and give you an exhaust leak. Check your engine temp. Look for signs of bad thermostat, stuck fan clutch, or a cooling system. So if your fan is just running, not cycling on and off, you got a fan clutch issue. And check for signs of a stuck jake brake, dirty air filter, or faulty EGR valve that could be lowering exhaust temps. And of course, give us a call. Get your DPF professionally cleaned if it hasn't been serviced in over 200,000 miles. Look at your fuel system. Bad injectors or excessive idling could be causing too much soot, which makes it difficult to properly regen. And I've got a shameless plug, and I can't recommend this enough. Consider using an additive such as our friends at Clean Air Fleet. And that will get your engine to run cleaner, produce less soot at the source. But if you're dealing with repeated engine failures or engine regen failures, I should say, don't ignore it. Call us at 404-999-1361, and we'll help you figure it out before your truck derates and you end up on the back of a tow truck somewhere. Give us a call right now. And you can talk to Lynn Diesel. She is our AI receptionist, and she can ask you a few questions. We can collect your data and then give you a call back in the morning. All right, let's go to number 2. Actually, let me check to see if anybody left me a message. Not quite yet, which is fine. All right, what happens if I ignore an EGR-related code for too long? Well, first of all, anytime you get a code, it's telling you that you want to do something about it, sooner than later. It doesn't mean necessarily that the house is burning down. You got to stop and take care of it right away. But don't let a code just stay on your dashboard forever, because it'll generally, if you don't schedule the service, it will schedule it for you. So ignoring an EGR-related code is one of the quickest ways to turn a small problem into a big and expensive failure. The EGR system is directly tied to your engine's emissions and overall health. So when something goes wrong, it can cause a chain reaction of issues throughout your engine and your aftertreatment system. Number 1, increased soot production and overloading the DPF. A malfunctioning EGR valve can stick open or closed, causing the wrong amount of gas to be recirculated. If EGR valve is stuck open, the engine gets too much exhaust and not enough fresh air, leading to incomplete combustion and excessive soot production. If stuck closed, the engine runs hotter, increasing NOx emissions and causing more DEF to be used. So that's one thing you want to look at as well, is kind of see how your DEF levels are doing. Be familiar with that, like how many miles you go before you burn, before you use up a tank of DEF. And if all of a sudden it seems like the amount of DEF you're using is going up, and you really can't figure out why, that's really telling you there's something going on, even more so than potentially an engine code. So either way, EGR issues can cause excessive soot, clog your DPF faster, leading to more frequent regens and potential DPF filter failure. What if your EGR cooler is just clogged? The EGR cooler is designed to cool down hot gases before they recirculate in the engine. Over time, the cooler can clog with soot, restricting airflow and causing higher exhaust temperatures. If completely blocked, the EGR system stops working entirely, forcing more NOx through the aftertreatment system and putting extra stress on the DEF and SCR system. Worst case scenario, extreme heat can warp the EGR cooler, crack the housing, even damage the engine head. What we'll see is if there's any chance of failure, there's a lot of little TIG welds inside that EGR cooler. And if it's going to fail for any reason, this is the kind of thing that will cause it to fail. A face plug DOC and DPF, since bad EGR increases soot output, the soot has to go somewhere, and it will clog up your DOC and DPF. Clogged EGR often leads to face plugging of the DOC and DPF, which prevents the aftertreatment system from functioning properly, calling for more regens, so on and so forth, and possibly even derating your truck. This means that your truck won't regen correctly, if it regens at all, leading to continuous check engine lights, derate, and limp mode. What else can cause this? Failed sensors. The EGR system isn't functioning correctly, can send false readings to the ECM. The DPF pressure sensors, exhaust gas temperature sensors, and NOx sensors all rely on accurate data to manage the emission system. When these readings are thrown off, your truck might incorrectly trigger regens, throw DEF-related codes, or even shut down entirely. What else can do it? Potential coolant leaks into the after-treatment system. This is definitely something you want to watch out for, because if the EGR does develop a pinhole inside it, it will leak coolant into your exhaust system. And this can cause severe damage to the DOC, DPF, and SCR because coolant will flush out precious metals, reducing their effectiveness. It's interesting that the propylene glycol, the chemicals inside the coolant, actually act as a solvent in the DPF system, in the DOC specifically. And it will cause the precious metals to come loose from the DOC and flush their way into the DPF. It can also create temperature inversion, which is exactly what happens when you're the DOC, the precious metals in the DOC end up in the DPF. The DOC doesn't produce the temperature, the DPF does, but the heat is in the wrong spot, and so it won't burn the soot off the DPF. So don't ignore an EGR code. Get it diagnosed more thoroughly, quickly. Check for stuck EGR valves. Check for the delta P sensor, the pressure differential sensor in the EGR cooler will often get filled up with soot. A mechanic can run a piece of wire through it, clean that out. Inspect the EGR cooler for clogging or leaks. Catching a failing EGR cooler early can save thousands in repairs. And of course, get your DPF cleaned. I can't tell you to do that enough. And if it's been a couple 100,000 miles, 300,000 miles, 400,000 miles since you got your DPF cleaned, you don't want to get that done because the soot can build up in the DPF and will work its way back and back and back, actually up through your turbo into your EGR cooler and really cause a mess upstream in the engine. And to keep things clean, Clean Air Fleet, run a good additive on your truck, such as Clean Air Fleet, keeps the EGR system cleaner by improving combustion efficiency and reducing soot at the source. An ignored EGR code doesn't stay just an EGR problem. It leads to DPF failure, SCR damage, coolant leaks, turbo issues, and even engine damage over time. So if you've been running with the EGR code, call DPF guys at 404-999-1361. We can give you a full diagnostics, and after-treatment inspection, and before that turns into a large repair bill. If you need to get a hold of us, 404-999-1361, 404-999-1361. Call or text us anytime, even right now, and we can get back to you and help you out with whatever is ailing you. All right, let's see if we got anything coming in here. We do not. All right, number 3. How do I know if my turbo is causing DPF issues? So the turbo and DPF are directly connected. The turbo is normally just a few feet away from the DPF. It's kind of the last engine component that the exhaust flows through before it enters into the after-treatment section of the truck. If the turbo isn't working properly, it can lead to serious after-treatment issues. And almost all after-treatment issues aren't being caused by the DPF or DOC or SCR itself. Yes, sometimes sensors fail or things like that, but usually it's something up in the engine, including the turbo. So the trick is identifying whether your turbo is the real cause or if your DPF problems are coming from something else. So what can we see? If we do a DPF cleaning, we see any oil in the DPF, that's immediately a red flag. That's telling us usually that oil contamination is usually telling us that the turbo seals are failing and engine oil can leak into the exhaust system and get trapped in the DPF. And oil burns at a lower temperature than soot, leading to uncontrolled regen cycles and possible DPF cracking. That oil can actually catch on fire and turn your exhaust pipe into a flamethrower. It is not pretty. And you can see black or blue smoke from the exhaust, indicating that oil is getting in there. Blue smoke, burning oil. Black smoke can also be burning oil. Both types of smoke, black, blue, white. And that is just, you should never see anything coming out of the tailpipe except for maybe some condensation, depending upon if the temperature is right. What else do you notice? Leggy performance, low boost pressure. Turbo's job is to maintain proper airflow into the engine. If boost pressure is too low, the engine runs rich, too much fuel, not enough air. creating excess soot. If the turbo is surging or not holding boost properly, it can cause regens to fail or the truck to constantly request regen simply because the engine is not running right and you can't properly run a regen. Um, how does it sound? Is it whining loudly when it didn't do that before? Grinding is never good. If you hear anything, it sounds like it's grinding coffee. Oh, not good. Um, and that can indicate the bearings are failing. And if the bearings do fail, I mean, you want to get that taken care of before it completely catastrophically fails, because a failed turbo can pump the entire amount of your engine oil down into the emission system in a matter of a few seconds, and that can be cured, um, but it's a mess and it's expensive to fix. And of course, a damaged turbo can just explode and send pieces of itself all over the place, and where places where it shouldn't be in the engine. Um, and a turbo that's not supplying enough air to the engine will increase soot output, forcing the truck into regens more frequently. So if your DPF keeps clogging, even after a cleaning, I would recommend checking injectors and also make sure the turbo's doing okay. What causes turbo failures? So oil contamination from a leaking turbo seal, um, basically just wear in the seals. That's why you want to make sure you keep your oil clean. Clean Air Fleet does do a oil filtration system that actually runs on the truck, and gets the particulate matter out of that oil, which can damage all these moving parts, especially the high speed bearings in the turbo. Also, if you do have high soot buildup, what's interesting is that soot can actually build up on the walls of your exhaust pipes leading to the turbo. And if a chunk of that falls loose and gets sucked into the turbo, the turbine spinning at about 30,000 RPMs. And if a chunk of soot, even a small chunk of soot, hits those blades, it can just destroy them, like hitting it with a bullet. Let's see. You could have a cracked or leaking charged air cooler. If there's a leak in the charged air system, the turbo has to work harder to reduce efficiency, and it reduces efficiency. The EPA, ECM, not EPA. I get my head stuck in EPA. The ECM compensates for this low boost efficiency with more fuel, which creates more soot, overloading the DPF potentially. Carbon buildup on the variable geometry turbo vanes, the VGT vanes. And if carbon builds up on those, they stick, reducing turbo efficiency and increasing soot production and throwing them out of calibration. So how do you find out? Basic stuff. Check for oil leaks. Is your oil level dropping, but you don't know where it's going? It could be going to the exhaust. When you get your DPF clean, the person who does it should use the DPF as kind of a canary in a coal mine, and they can look at the DPF and see if there's any oil contamination in the DPF that would indicate that something's going on upstream. Check your boost pressure. If you got it hooked up for diagnostics, see how the boost looks. If your truck is not hitting expected boost levels, your turbo may not be functioning properly. Check for excessive crankcase pressure. Believe it or not, restricted crankcase breather can push oil past the turbo seals, leading to oil entering the DPF. And of course, you never want to push oil past the turbo seals anyway. If you remove the intake pipe and the turbo shaft moves excessively, wugga, 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 the bearings are worn and the turbo needs to be replaced. I mean, there's just nothing you can do about that. You need to replace it or get it rebuilt. We have some good companies in Atlanta that will rebuild turbos. They do a really nice job. So if your turbo is leaking oil into the exhaust, it simply needs to be replaced. And you want to do that before it fails tragically and pumps gallons of oil downstream, causing quite a mess. And inspect all of your air system, your charged air cooler, etc., for any sort of leaks. That goes back to, if your turbo is working fine, but you're still seeing frequent regens, you probably due for a DPF cleaning. Well, whatever you do, ignoring anything that fails in your truck, especially your turbo, you can destroy your DPF and potentially your engine as well. So if you suspect your turbo is the reason your DPF keeps clogging up, give us a call, 404-999-1361, before things get any worse. Screenshot this baby, 404-999-1361. Give us a call anytime, day or night. You might not reach a person, but you'll definitely reach a very smart AI. Her name is Lynn Diesel. She's actually working right now if you want to give her a call. What's another one? Oh, this is the one we were just talking about. My truck runs fine, but my DEF consumption is way higher than normal. What the heck is going on? All right, so if you're DEF, or diesel exhaust fluid, consumption is suddenly increased. That's why it's important to always kind of pay attention to what your fuel economy is, what your DEF consumption is, because changes in any sort of consumption of fuel, DEF, etc., coolant, any of those fluids can definitely mean that there's something going on. So if your DEF consumption has gone up, but the truck is still running pretty good, something is throwing off the SCR system. So a spike in DEF usage usually means that the truck is producing more NOx than normal, or well, we're going to get to the sensors in a second, or it thinks the truck is producing more NOx than normal. So it might be something as simple as a faulty NOx sensor giving false readings. In other words, it's saying, man, I'm smelling NOx. Give me some DEF. I'm still smelling NOx. Give me more DEF. But that's because the sensor might be bad, and that can be easily kind of dug out and ferreted out by some diagnostics and looking at the inlet and outlet NOx parameters and finding out kind of what your NOx production is for your type of vehicle. And so your truck's selective catalytic reduction, or SCR system, uses NOx sensors to determine how much DEF to inject. If a NOx sensor is misreading the amount of NOx in the exhaust, the truck may overinject the DEF to correct for a problem that doesn't actually exist. So what do you want to check? Use a diagnostics tool to see if the upstream and downstream NOx sensors match expected values. It could be a leaking DEF injector or a dosing valve stuck open. The DEF doser or the DEF injector sprays fluid in a fine mist before it reaches the SCR. If the injector is leaking or stuck open, it could be wasting DEF. Even when it's not needed, you can definitely see this by seeing DEF buildup. And that's where you look for the crystallized DEF around the injector and the SCR system. Could be a clogged or inefficient SCR catalyst. So the SCR system contains a catalyst that reacts with the DEF to break down the NOx emissions. The SCR, if it's clogged or worn out, it may not be reducing the NOx efficiency, causing the ECM to overcompensate by injecting more DEF. So what to check? If you've had SCR efficiency codes, excessive DEF usage, it could mean it's time to inspect or replace the SCR. Now, the SCR is at the end of the line, and they're really, it should last the life of the truck. But there are things that can cause the STR to give issues. One of them being if you have something that cracks the DPF, the soot then works its way down in the SCR, what's called poisoning the SCR. The SCR stops working like it should, and now you have some codes. You need to have somebody like us restore your SCR. It's not a big project. It costs a few $100 to do it, but there's time. But you also have to replace the DPF if that's the case. Oh, what else? You could have a situation where the engine is producing excessive soot, and the soot is adding to the NOx production. So if your engine is producing too much soot, it can lead to higher than normal NOx output, forcing the SCR system to work harder and again consume more DEF. And what are the usual suspects when it comes to excessive soot? Number one thing we look at is failing fuel injectors. Injecting too much fuel, overfueling, poor spray pattern, leaking, dripping, all sorts of stuff. Clogged EGR. And the EGR cooler is the first defense against NOx. And if the EGR is not able to do its job by properly routing exhaust back into the combustion chambers to further burn off the NOx before it even gets downstream, you're going to force the SCR to work harder and in the process consume more DEF. Low engine temps, which we talked about in one of the previous questions. If you're not getting the engine temps you need, you're not going to get the heat you need downstream, and you'll also have inefficient combustion, producing more NOx and soot. Another thing is using old DEF. If the DEF you're using is low quality or contaminated, again, I'm not talking about cheap DEF versus expensive DEF or platinum DEF versus whatever, right? All DEF is of equal quality. It's 32.5% urea, which is the nitrogen, and 67.5% deionized distilled water. So it's just water and urea, water and nitrogen. And whether you get that from Walmart or from Tractor Supply or Home Depot or the buy your jugs wherever you want, they're all going to be good. Get the cheapest one you can, just make sure it's fresh. You can also use DEF from the pump. That works perfectly well as long as that DEF is clean, tested, and fresh. So what do you want to check? Always use certified DEF. All DEF is certified. Don't store DEF in an open container where it can get contaminated and absorb moisture and throw things off. And also be in contact with air, which will oxidize it and cause it to spoil, just like beer or wine. Also, DEF is very sensitive to temperature. So if you had a big tote of DEF and it's been sitting out in the sun for a year or two, it's probably no good anymore. So you want to make sure you've got fresh DEF. If you want to get it by the tote, go ahead, just use it. You want to make sure you're using that tote, but once every 3 to 6 months, not letting it sit around. No matter how much money you can save, you're gonna make up for the savings in DEF by added service. Also, it could be something as simple as not mechanical. It could be software related. So if your truck has recently had an ECM update or repair, and the DEF injection rates may not be properly calibrated. So in some cases, an outdated software version can cause excessive DEF consumption because the truck isn't calculating NOx reduction efficiently. I have seen personally in the last couple of months, probably a dozen trucks that were having issues that were all resolved by a simple software update. So, much like you would update your computer or your phone to make sure it's working properly. And it's the strangest thing because you're like, well, it worked fine for months and it started giving me trouble. I always tell people check for an update, get that done, and then come back to us if something's really causing you to pull your hair out. So what should you do if your truck is burning too much DEF? Check your NOx sensors for faults. Inspect the DEF injector. Look for crystallization buildup. Look for excessive soot production. Check the fuel injectors, EGR functions, and look for exhaust leaks. Confirm the SCR is working properly. Make sure you don't have any soot on your tailpipe. And make sure you're using good, high-quality DEF. I do recommend that everybody keeps a DEF refractometer in their truck. It's a $25, $30 item. We do sell them. Doesn't take batteries or anything like that. Can save yourself a lot of money on diagnostics and headache if you can just make sure that the DEF in the tank is good. All right, question number 5. Of course, if you have questions about your DEF, you know what you can do. Give us a call, 404-999-1361. Call or a text works beautifully. All right, number 5. Back to the exhaust leaks. What's the best way to check for exhaust leaks that could mess with my regen? Even small exhaust leaks can cause major problems with DPF and the system, the regeneration of your system. So if your truck isn't building enough heat during regen, or if it's struggling with back pressure and sensor readings, you might have an exhaust leak somewhere in the system. So what do you got to do? Why does this mess with your regens in the first place? So heat is the number one thing that your truck needs to properly burn the soot off of it. And if you even a small leak, a hairline crack can reduce exhaust temperatures, and regen, the engine or the exhaust won't get hot enough to burn off the soot. Can also throw off sensor readings and cause the ECM to miscalculate soot load and trigger false regens. Can disrupt your back pressure. Incorrect readings can cause regen failure and even derate the engine, believe it or not. Not on every truck, but on some of them. and allow fresh air to enter the exhaust system, which can dilute the knock sensor readings, messing with the def injection and causing SCR codes. And, that's more the exception than the rule, but it can happen. So where do you start looking for exhaust leak? I always have people look from the turbo on back, and you want to look for leaks between the turbo and the DOC, and that can definitely affect regen temperatures to drop and make your regen simply not kick off or make it ineffective. Looking for any sort of black soot marks or on clamps or gaskets, because these are sign of a leak. Inspect the bellows pipe. So like I said before, some of the bellows will have an insulation wrapper on it. You really can't see the accordion on there. But if you look close enough, you can see if there's any hairline cracking in the bellows. Even a small crack in the bellows can drop temperature enough to stop a regen from working. Check all your clamps and gaskets down the line for your DPF and DOC. If any of these clamps are loose, broken, or missing, the exhaust pressure will be off, to put it lightly, leading to incomplete regen cycles. Failed or missing gaskets. I've had trucks come in here. One guy came in, he was quoted $18,000 to fix his DPF system. And it turns out he was simply missing one $35 gasket, replaced that, and he was on his way. So you just want to look visually for exhaust leaks, look for black soot markers, that sort of stuff. Soapy water if you want, but I mean, you normally don't even need that. Just listen for any sort of hissing or it sounds like anything is leaking. If you want to get really fancy and you have an infrared scanner, they sell them on TikTok. You can look to see if there's any hot spots anywhere. If you do find an exhaust leak, tighten the clamps. Make sure the clamps aren't loose, tighten them. Replace cracked or leaking bellows pipes. Those can be a little pricey, but that's really the only way to fix that. And if the flex pipe is leaking, regens won't work until that thing is replaced. And, maybe once you get your exhaust leaks fixed, you might want to seek out somebody like us and get your DPF cleaned. Because if your regen has been failing due to an exhaust leak, your DPF might already be clogged, chock full with a bunch of soot. You need someone like us to get it out. So even the tiniest exhaust leak can cause big regen issues, and they are far cheaper to fix than replacing your entire system. Many of these leaks happen up at the turbo, and some of them also happen with the DPF clamps and gaskets. But if you suspect you have an issue, call or text us 404-999-1361. Again, call or text us anytime. You can do it right now if you want. 404-999-1361, and we will help you out and get your truck back running good and get you back making money. All right, what do you have for number 6 here? Can a bad fuel filter affect my DPF system? And the answer is yes, indeedy it can. So a clogged fuel filter reduces fuel flow to the injectors, which can lead to an unbalanced air-fuel ratio if the filter is really bad. And when too much air, not enough fuel reaches the combustion chamber, the engine burns fuel incompletely and inefficiently, and it'll create soot because all soot is unburned diesel fuel, much like when you have a fire in your fireplace or your campfire. And before that thing really gets rip-roaring, it'll be really smoky. That's because you're having incomplete combustion and it's producing soot or smoke, and that's exactly what your engine does. So if your engine's running inefficiently, not burning things completely, more soot means your DPF fills up faster, triggering more frequent regens. Another thing is injector misfires, overfueling. That could be caused by a fuel filter issue. So if fuel pressure is too low due to a clogged filter, injectors may misfire or even overcompensate by injecting more fuel than necessary. Overfueling also leads to incomplete combustion, which dumps excess soot into your exhaust system. More soot equals more regens, more downtime, and more money in my pocket cleaning that crap out of there. When fuel delivery is inconsistent, the engine works harder to maintain power, creating higher exhaust temps. This can lead to soot packing in the DOC and DPF, forcing regens to happen more often. And also, if it gets too bad, to not work at all. So if you don't do anything, you're going to face plug your DOC and DPF, leading to a full system failure. And again, it's recoverable. You can clean it, you can fix it usually, but I think there's no bigger waste of money than having to be put on the back of a tow truck when you don't need to be. And if you can avoid that, that is everything that we want you to do. So warning signs of a bad fuel injector: typical loss of power, hesitation under acceleration, check engine lights, fuel pressure related codes, sometimes increased fuel consumption due to poor injector performance. And, that's really the big thing. I mean, you'll, and just as with Clean Air Fleet, for example, when one of our customers begins using the fuel additive, one thing that it does is it breaks down all of the gook in the engine, all of the carbon buildup, all the tars buildup, and that will then be released and then captured into the fuel filter. I always warn people that when they begin using Clean Air Fleet for the first time, once they've treated 1 or 2 tanks worth of fuel, it's almost certain that they'll have to replace the fuel filter because all of that junk is coming loose and getting stuck in the fuel filter. And I always tell people, don't worry, it means it's working. So what do you need to do? Change your fuel filter regularly, every 15,000 to 30,000 miles. But if you're in a harsh conditions, or you don't have any choice but to use low quality fuel, you should be doing it more often. And that's really it. I would highly recommend, to keep your fuel filters clean, is use the Clean Air Fleet diesel additive. If you do want to get a 10% discount on Clean Air Fleet, text the word additive, ADDITIVE, to 404-999-1361. So bad fuel filter can absolutely lead to more soot production, faster DPF clogging, and failed regens. So if your truck is having regen problems, don't just assume it's your after treatment system. Check your fuel filter and your fuel pressure as part of the diagnostics. And so if you need any help diagnosing this, give us a call, 404-999-1361. Give us a call or a text, 404-999-1361, before you waste any money on unnecessary repairs. This is an interesting one. How does humidity and moisture affect my after treatment system? And before I answer that, let's check to see if anybody left a message here. Not yet. All right. So it's true. Humidity and moisture can cause issues with your DPF, SCR, and your DEF system, especially in high humidity environments or during seasonal weather changes. While the water itself in the exhaust really isn't harmful in typical small quantities, excess water in the wrong places can lead to sensor failures and DPF issues. If you have water in your system, it can cause incomplete regens because the DPF relies on heat to burn off soot during a regen, and that water will absorb the heat and lower the regen temps. Condensation can build up. Truck sits for long periods in humid or wet conditions. Moisture can collect inside the exhaust system, potentially leading to rust and corrosion and damage to sensors. And this is very common if the truck is run and then shut down before reaching full operating temperatures. Keep in mind that other than carbon dioxide or CO2, the only thing that is left after all of your emissions system does its thing is water and nitrogen. So just the very process of burning fuel will actually, or the process of your emission system doing what it does, will actually produce water. And if you don't get things hot enough to actually turn that into, steam or to dry it out, you can have water build up in your emission systems. And the main thing is, if it stays too moist too long, it's probably going to affect your sensors more than anything else, get things rusty. And that's really what you want to avoid. Oh, what else? High humidity, extremely high humidity, or in a situation where you've got the cap on your DEF tank isn't being sealed right, you can get water in your DEF tank or your fuel, which is never good. And the water in the DEF tank can dilute your DEF, and that's where the refractometer comes into play. The water in your fuel, which you should try to avoid, would normally be separated out by your DAVCO or your fuel water separator. But that the additive that's spinning around right over my left shoulder here, Clean Air Fleet, that also is a water displacer and will make sure that 100% of the water in your fuel is demulsified, basically knocked out to the bottom of the tank. So, what do you need to do? Just make sure if your truck is going to sit for long periods, start it up and let it run to full operating temperature, occasionally dry things out. Um, just look for any sort of, excessive rust or anything like that. Um, and what else? I mean, use dielectric grease on the electrical connectors, and use the Clean Air Fleet diesel additive. I can't recommend that enough. If you want to know more about your emission system or Clean Air Fleet, give us a call, 404-999-1361. Again, 404-999-1361, and we'll do our best to help you out. We're cranking through these things. I must be hungry because when I get done, I have dinner. All right, number 8. My truck keeps throwing SCR efficiency codes, but the DEF system seems fine. What should I check next? All right, so this is a good one, especially because the SCR efficiency codes, it's really easy to spend a lot of money diagnosing that. Throwing NOx sensors at it, at $500 a NOx sensor, and just it can cost you a lot of money to find out what's not wrong. So if your truck is throwing SCR efficiency code, but the DEF system seems to be working okay, you're likely dealing with an issue upstream of the SCR system. And this is especially common. Listen carefully. This is especially common in 2014 to 16 Freightliners with Detroit engines. Now, it's actually the 2015 Freightliner, but how they do things with cars and trucks is the second half of 14 is technically 2015, and the first half of a 2016, plus or minus, is essentially 2015, but it's basically 14 to 16. What happened was back in 2014 through 2016, there was a fuel mapping issue from the factory, and that caused SCR failures over time. However, it can also be caused by a cracked DPF, allowing raw soot to pass into the SCR, effectively plugging up or poisoning the catalyst. But back to that 2015 DD13, DD15 Detroit engine, the bad fuel map caused excessive heat buildup in the SCR catalyst because it was overfueling, leading to premature degradation of the catalyst material. Once the SCR is damaged, it will start throwing SCR efficiency codes, even if the rest of the system is working perfectly. So I have told this story 1,000 times. If I've told it once, what that looks like is if you have a 2015 vintage, again, a 14, 15, or 16 Freightliner with the Detroit engine, here's what you'll notice. The truck runs perfectly fine when it's bobtail or lightly loaded. But when you're loaded, pulling 35,000 pounds of cheese and climbing a grade, it begins to throw SCR efficiency, NOx conversion, or DEF quality codes. Normally what happens is if you pull over and do a forced regen at the top of the hill, that will temporarily fix it, but the code always comes back under load. And the only fix for this is to replace or remanufacture your one box. Replacing the NOx sensors, cleaning the DPF, or changing the DEF injector will not fix the problem. The SCR is damaged from years of excessive heat due to the fuel mapping issue. And at DPF, guys, guess what? We offer brand new one boxes. Who knew it? With a 3-year unlimited mileage warranty, as well as rebuilt one boxes with new SCR substrates. So I would, definitely suggest giving us a call about this. And, again, call or text us at 404-999-1361. And, let's see how we can help you out. Again, find us at 404-999-1361. Call or text us. You can do it even right now and tell us what your problem is, and we can help you get to the bottom of it, even if you're not in the area. All right, almost to the end here. Number 9, big number 9. What's the biggest mistake people make when troubleshooting DPF issues? This is kind of a matter of opinion, I suppose. The biggest mistake people make when troubleshooting DPF problems is focusing on the symptom instead of the root cause. A clogged DPF is almost never the actual problem. It's the result of something else going wrong upstream. Instead of figuring out why the DPF is filling up too fast, many drivers and mechanics throw parts at the regens, parts of the problem, force regens, or even worse, delete the emissions system entirely. So, all you're doing when you delete your emission system, when you have a problem, is fixing the symptom. You still have an upstream issue in the engine. So, you have all the typical stuff. You've got, maybe it's failing fuel injectors, especially if you've got a box truck with a Cummins 6.7 engine and 250,000 miles on that baby. It's almost guaranteed to be failed fuel injectors. Maybe your EGR valve is stuck open, dumping too much exhaust back into the, exhaust back into the intake. Clogged crankcase breather, low boost from a bad turbo, exhaust leaks. So instead of just cleaning the DPF over and over, you need to diagnose and fix the root issue. We can definitely help you out with that. And definitely give us a call at 404-999-1361. Give us a call at 404-999-1361 and let us help you out with some of the diagnostics. We'll even talk to your mechanic or whatever it might be. It's never a bad idea to have a second opinion on these things before you end up spending way too much money kind of going down dead ends. All right, number 10. Last but not least, are after-treatment problems getting better or worse with newer trucks? Well, yeah, it's a great question. The answer isn't quite as simple as better or worse, like better or worse. Newer trucks have more advanced emission systems, which means they can be more efficient. But they also come with more failure points and higher repair costs in more complex diagnostics. So, what's the good news? Newer trucks have more efficient after-treatment systems, better regeneration cycles. Modern trucks are designed to regen more efficiently and at lower temperatures, reducing the risks of DPF clogging. Many newer models have active monitorings of exhaust temps to ensure more consistent regens, and meaning that you end up regenning only when you need to, not when you don't need to, because a regen will always burn a little bit more fuel than normal running. The more efficient engines produce less soot, which means they can go longer between DPF cleanings. And stricter engine tuning means because the engine's running more efficiently, your emissions system does not have to work as hard as it used to on older models. Better, more reliable sensors, and just more knowledge in the industry to more quickly and efficiently diagnose these things. The bad, more sensors. You've got soot sensors now. You've got things. They're monitoring more stuff, so there's more things, more points of failure. More expensive replacement parts in some of the newer trucks, on some of the newer Volvos and Max, especially the Freightliners with the one box. Depending on what goes wrong, but there are cases where on the older truck you could just replace one of a single component, where on the newer trucks, if something goes wrong with one of those components, you might have to replace multiple components because they're all together in one single assembly. I would say, the biggest thing overall is not so much, emissions, pre-emissions, and everything else. It's just that it's not just refrigerators and dishwashers and other things that are kind of built with engineered obsolescence in them. I think at one point in the past, a truck was built to be able to last 1 million miles pretty comfortably. And, right now, they're engineering these brand new trucks to last about 480,000 miles. Now, again, doesn't mean the truck's going to completely fall apart in 480,000 miles, but they're saying, we want to design everything so it lasts about 480,000 miles. And if you actually look at your repair history, you'll probably find out that, yeah, 480 is about when things start to break. The important thing is to know what those things are and be able to tell people, hey, your truck's got, you've got a Detroit engine and your truck has 600,000 miles on it. Make sure you get your overhead done. Make sure you get your valve adjustment done. That's very, very important. In fact, on a Freightliner with the Detroit, I would recommend getting your valve adjustment done before 600, somewhere between 500 and 600,000 miles. If you don't get the valve adjustment done, you're going to be seeing low compression in one or more of the cylinders, and that will crack your DPF and, be more expensive to repair. Not the end of the world, but if you can avoid doing that by getting a $500-$600 valve adjustment done, that's a great thing. The injector failure on those Cummins 6.7s at 250,000 miles. It's just the nature of the beast. They've designed these things to not have as long of a lifespan, but the good news is if you know what to look for and you know what to fix before it breaks, you can get this done, and you can get 1 million miles out of these trucks, and you can get it done really affordably if you just know who to talk to. And we would very much like to be one of the people you talk to. Need to get a hold of us, 404-999-1361, 404-999-1361. Call or text us. All right, let me quick check my text messages here. I heard my phone ding a couple of times. All right, what do we got here? All right. Good deal. No questions. So that's either good news or bad news. I'm going to check to see if anything came in while we're talking here. No. All right. I think I had more activity during the Super Bowl. I wonder if people were avoiding watching the Super Bowl. Before I let you go here, I just want to make sure I remind you that the Clean Air Fleet additive, if you see that spinning behind me, highly recommend you give it a try. Anybody with your first order of 4 gallons, a case of 4 gallons, we will give you a 10% discount on that order, which is a pretty sweet deal. And a case of 4 gallons will treat about 1,280 gallons of diesel fuel, and you won't believe the difference it makes in your truck. So there you have it. Your questions, my answers. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all very, very much. If you're catching this live, thank you for hanging out with us. If you're catching this as a recording, that's perfectly fine. Make sure you keep our number handy, 404-999-1361. Please feel free to even call us now. You'll actually be able to leave us a voicemail or talk to Lynn Diesel, and she'll let me know to give you a call back. Text us anytime, 404-999-1361, 404-999-1361. We will get back to you. Make sure you subscribe to DPF Guys on the YouTube channel. Like us, our Facebook page, and find us on TikTok. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.
Haze, just clear skies ahead with DPF Guys. Your exhaust game's on tread. We got the tools, the skills, the might to get your truck rolling clean into the night. Throttle up, feel that clean airflow. Our service so slick, your ride seals the show. DPF Guys, we got the fit so fine. Hit the road with confidence. Now the world's your shrine, bringing that rig.